Welcome to the Iran 1400 Project podcast, where we explore the past, present, and possible futures of Iran through informed dialogue, independent thought, and diverse voices. From historical insight to emerging narratives, we connect ideas to action in the pursuit of a more just, inclusive, and forward-looking society. Join us as we rethink Iran's trajectory, one conversation at a time.
Have you ever stopped to think about how a country's whole idea of war?
Not just who they fight, but the fundamental why and how.
Exactly. How they view conflict itself and how that perspective can just, completely shift over time.
A really radical transformation sometimes.
Yeah, radical. And how that shift can then create this huge gap.
A massive divide, between the leaders and, the people they lead.
That is precisely what we're exploring today. We've got this source, and it's frankly fascinating. It tracks the evolution of Iran's concept of war over the last, century or so?
It really lays out this long trajectory.
And our mission here is to unpack that journey, understand the different phases, these shifts.
And connect it to what's happening in Iran today. See what it tells us.
It's quite a story, actually, and not straightforward at all. The source outlines this path. It starts with war as a kind of fight for justice.
Then it morphs into a tool for, state building.
Right. And then after the revolution, it becomes this sacred, almost existential duty.
A defining ideology, really.
But now, for many Iranians, the feeling is very different. Fatigue, dissent, even.
It's a complex narrative, definitely. Lots of twists.
Absolutely. So let's start at the beginning, maybe. Early 20th century.
Okay. The source roots those initial ideas in justice, like you said, and also this early push towards building a modern state.
Yeah, looking back, especially around the Constitutional Revolution, 1905 to 1911, that was a key moment.
A huge challenge to the old Qajar dynasty, trying to establish some kind of dignity and rights.
And the way conflict was framed then, it wasn't about grabbing land.
No, it was articulated much more through justice, liberation, this fight for national dignity. The source even mentions poets like R.F. Ghazvini.
Right, seeing struggles not as standard warfare, but as a kind of noble resistance.
That's a really powerful distinction, isn't it? Fighting for dignity.
So that was the initial framing. How did things change under Reza Shah?
Well, Reza Shah brought a completely different agenda. His whole focus was centralization.
Building a modern state, consolidating power.
Exactly. Huge military reforms, a unified national army, new academies, bringing in Western training, weapons.
So the military became central to his project.
Fundamentally. The idea of war under him was re-engineered. Less about popular justice.
And more about?
More about top-down state control, internal order. The military was the absolute backbone of his new Iran.
Okay, so a shift from popular dignity to state order. Then we get to his son, Mohammad Reza Shah. The ambition seems to go regional then.
Oh, definitely. It scaled up massively under the second Pahlavi Shah. Iran developed these incredibly deep ties with the U.S., with Israel.
Positioning itself as a key player in the Cold War context.
Absolutely. A pillar of containment against Soviet influence. The Shah openly talked about Iran as a regional hegemon.
And acted on it too, right? Like the intervention in Oman.
Yes, the Dhofar Rebellion. That's a prime example of projecting that power outwards.
But the source makes a critical point here about what this modernization really meant.
It does, and it's quite insightful. All this military buildup. The argument is that it served the monarchy's prestige, its external alliances.
More than building genuine, independent national strength.
Exactly. This heavy reliance on Western powers, particularly the U.S., became a massive vulnerability.
Which became starkly clear during the revolution.
Painfully clear. The military's almost complete collapse in '79 wasn't just a strategic failure. It was symbolic of that dependency, that disconnect from the popular will.
Which leads us straight into the 1979 Islamic Revolution. And this is where the whole concept of war gets fundamentally redefined. Again.
Completely rewritten. The revolution introduces this whole new ideological language.
Words like
martyrdom, sacrifice, divine justice. These become the core terms for understanding struggle.
And critically, this era gives birth to the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps.
A defining creation of the new regime.
So how was the IRGC different from the regular army, the Artesh? What was its specific job?
Its mission was just fundamentally different. It wasn't primarily about defending geographical borders in the old way.
It was about ideology.
Precisely. Safeguarding the revolutionary values. Ensuring the survival of the Islamic Republic itself.
Against threats both outside and inside.
Exactly. Its mandate was deeply political, deeply ideological from the start.
And the event that really cemented this new ideology of war was the Iran-Iraq War. 1980 to 88.
Well, that conflict was absolutely transformative. It was framed by the regime as this existential fight for survival.
And it managed to fuse that sense of national defense protecting the homeland with this intense spiritual narrative.
Yeah, this sacred defense, defy Makadas. That term wasn't just rhetoric. It became the foundational myth of the Islamic Republic.
Giving the war this sense of religious duty, national destiny.
Absolutely. And the impact on the state, on society, it was immense. It shaped institutions for decades to come.
You can really see that lasting legacy.
Totally reshaped things. The IRGC emerges as this permanent, incredibly powerful parallel military force, often eclipsing the conventional army.
And the Bassi militia too.
The Bassis mobilized millions, young people, older people, drawn into operations often defined by that martyrdom symbolism, the human wave attacks.
A very different kind of warfare.
And importantly, this period also saw the birth of Iran's first major proxy force.
Hezbollah in Lebanon.
Exactly. Established during the war, it really set the template, the model for exporting this ideology and building alliances with non-state actors across the region.
So the war solidified the regime's ideology and power structure, but the cost, staggering.
Unbelievably high. Nearly 1 million lives lost on both sides, economies shattered, but beyond the physical cost.
The narrative.
The narrative of sacred defense became deeply moralized, woven into the national identity promoted by the state.
Okay, so that takes us from the intense period of the sacred defense into the post-war era. And here we see another big strategic shift, right?
Yes, another crucial adjustment. Iran comes out of the war scarred, isolated, under embargoes.
And realizes it can't just compete head-on conventionally.
Pretty much. Competing with major powers in traditional military terms was just not feasible. So the strategy shifts.
Towards what?
Towards asymmetric capabilities. Developing the missile program, drones, cyber warfare, and really leaning into cultivating those regional militias.
The proxy network.
And the IRGC's own doctrine evolves alongside this. You start hearing about strategic depth and forward defense.
How did those ideas change their approach? What do they mean in practice?
They essentially redefine the battlefield. Strategic depth is about confronting threats far away before they reach Iran's borders, pushing the defense outwards.
And for defense?
Takes it a step further. It implies preempting conflict, deploying assets, projecting influence across the region to shape the environment.
So the missiles, the drones allow strikes far away.
Right. And the proxies allow operations, influence, pushing back against rivals, often with plausible deniability for Tehran.
And the result of this strategy is what people now often call the axis of resistance.
Exactly. That network of allies, Hezbollah, the Houthis in Yemen, Iraqi militias, Palestinian groups like Hamas.
They act as force multipliers.
Precisely. Extending Iran's reach, blurring conflict lines, allowing sustained engagement far from home.
So when you look at Iran's military posture today, it's this really interesting mix.
It's fascinatingly complex, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's defensive in its official language, always about protecting Iran, its sovereignty, its interests.
But in practice,
its reach is undeniably offensive and expansive, striking targets deep in Syria, enabling attacks in the Red Sea, confronting Israel and the U.S. indirectly through cyber and these proxies.
Okay, now here's where the source really brings out this deep tension. A fracture inside Iran. This idea of war, maybe once unifying for some, has become really contested, especially for younger people.
This is the crucial turn back inwards. While the state projects this power externally, talks about resistance, that narrative is fraying at home. The idea of war, once perhaps sacred, is now widely questioned, particularly by generations who grew up after, say, the 2009 Green Movement protests.
Or even more recently, after the 2022 Woman Life Freedom protests.
Exactly. These are people who have lived through intense domestic repression, economic hardship.
And you can see this discontent openly.
Absolutely. The source points to slogans heard during protests. Things like, "Not for Gaza, not for Lebanon, my life only for Iran."
Which isn't necessarily saying ignore the world, but
It's more like a civic nationalism, an expression of deep fatigue with these ideological adventures abroad, paid for with Iranian resources, sometimes lives, while things are so difficult at home.
the article even mentions that veterans from the Iran-Iraq War feel this disconnect too.
Yes, it highlights that gap between the official myth and the lived reality. They're honored in name, perhaps, but many feel neglected in practice.
And for younger Iranians, the view is even more critical.
Critically so. They increasingly see the regime's focus on external conflict not as defense, not as dignity,
But as a distraction.
or worse, as the justification for the problems at home. For the economic failures, the repression, the lack of freedom, the censorship.
So the feeling is war isn't about protecting us anymore. It's about protecting the regime by diverting attention, avoiding reform.
That really captures the essence of this profound generational split. You have the older, state-backed narrative emphasizing sacrifice, unity forged in war.
And then you have these younger voices demanding accountability, basic rights, a different future inside Iran. This really ties everything together, doesn't it? It shows this chasm between the state's vision of war and how many people experience it.
It really does. You end up with these two clashing narratives operating simultaneously in Iran today.
On one side, the regime view. War in all its forms, missiles, militias, deterrence, is essential for survival, non-negotiable.
And on the other side,
A growing segment of the population seeing this constant external focus as the thing that prevents justice at home silences them and mortgages their future for abstract causes far away.
and there's that powerful moral critique embedded in this. The state talks about justice for Palestine, for example.
But citizens are asking, what about justice right here? In Evin prison, in Kurdish cities like Sanandaj or Mahabad? That question hangs heavy.
It does. And the recent conflict with Israel, the missile exchanges, they really throw this rupture into sharp relief.
How so?
Well, for the state, it's framed as righteous resistance, strategic victory, a show of strength.
But for many ordinary Iranians,
The feeling, as the source captures it, is quite different, a sense that this is not our war. It's not their victory to celebrate, nor really their loss to mourn. It feels distant, imposed.
so looking back over this whole century, from that early constitutional resistance through Reza Shah's modernization, the revolution's call to sacrifice, exporting ideology.
We arrive at this point, a moment of really deep civic questioning from within Iranian society.
And the core finding seems to be this challenge to the very foundations of state power and its purpose.
Exactly, a questioning from the ground up.
And it's important to note, the younger generation isn't passive here. They're highly political.
Oh, absolutely. But their battlefield, so to speak, is different from the state's.
How do you mean?
They aren't fighting primarily over territory or theology in the state's terms. They're fighting over the narrative, over having a voice, over shaping their own future.
It's like an evolution of resistance itself.
You could see it that way.
Yeah.
A significant part of the nation moving from being mobilized by the state's narrative of war and sacrifice
To being mobilized against it.
against that concept of war, yes, using memory, demanding truth, seeking dignity at home.
It really shows how these fundamental ideas, like war, aren't fixed. They get reshaped by lived experience, by generations.
Profoundly reshaped.
And it leaves us, and you listening, with a really significant question to ponder, doesn't it? Given this deep split, this tension between the state doctrine and these civic hopes, how can a nation even begin to reconcile such different visions of its purpose? Especially when one side sees constant readiness for conflict as vital for survival.
And the other sees that same conflict as the main obstacle to achieving justice and a decent life at home. It's a fundamental dilemma. Gives you a lot to think about.
Thank you for listening to the Iran 1400 Project podcast. The Iran 1400 Project invites scholars, experts, and intellectuals to share their assessment of the evolution of institutions and ideas during the past 100 years to inspire a vision of Iran in the 1400s. If you found today's episode thought-provoking, be sure to subscribe, share, and continue the conversation. For more content and upcoming events, visit Iran1400.org. Until next time, stay engaged, stay informed, and stay hopeful.